You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host and bourbon-soaked storyteller, Juliette Miranda.
Hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda, and welcome to episode 245 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. Today, I have two bourbon-soaked stories for you about a creature Christmas and eating the baby. But first, bourbon. Cheers, y'all. Whew. Oh, y'all. My guy and I are in the midst of a very, very crazy weekend in Biloxi, Mississippi. We decided to take a little bit of a winter getaway to a casino out here, and y'all, we are having a hell of a good time. And in that spirit, I thought I would kick off the festive holiday season here on the podcast with a little bit of a ghost of Christmas past. Today, we're going to be revisiting two of my very favorite Christmas stories from the way, way back. One story is from episode 163, and the other is from episode 119. And they both revolve around two things that aren't entirely Christmassy, but they are to me. They're about creatures. In the first story, my grandmother and I get a little batty. It is probably my favorite story about my grandmother. She was a crazy, intense woman who chain-smoked camels and had a way with a bat. And in the second story, well, it's about my guy and I getting into a little bit of trouble with something unexpected. A bunny rabbit. Anyway, y'all, I will be back next week with brand new bourbon-soaked stories, but until then, I hope you enjoy this visit with Christmases past. Cheers, y'all. Oh my God, if I see one more commercial for Ancestry.com or some other genealogy service, I'm gonna lose my mind. I am. I appreciate the desire to find out where you came from and all of that, but I can't help but question the accuracy of the results that these places deliver. I mean, it seems to me that if you want to know what you're made of, you should look to the people who shaped you. You don't have to look too far into my family tree to see where my crazy comes from. And I've talked about my mad scientist of a father and my pagan priestess mother, but crazy goes back even farther, like to my maternal grandmother. She was old school crazy at its finest. She was a lady who smoked camels while cooking, she stashed cash in her mattress, and she was rumored to have once broken a bottle over my grandfather's head. She was not the most popular member of my family by any stretch, but I absolutely adored her. To this day, the smell of stale bourbon, bacon buns, and bleach will forever remind me of her house, particularly at Christmas time. I was 7 or 8 when I was deposited on her doorstep one snowy December morning. My sister, who was barely 2 at the time, she'd be going with my parents to some getaway at a cabin in Michigan for the weekend. And I always kind of got the impression that my parents were hesitant to leave anything with my grandmother that couldn't dial 911 on its own, including our cats. And they would always leave me with instructions that I only vaguely understood. You know, they'd tell me to not drink anything that came in a bottle. And they'd say, open a window if the house gets too smoky. It was always implied that I would follow the same set of rules that I had at home. And if that isn't the dumbest assumption that my parents have ever held, I don't know what would be. Because every kid knows you follow the rules of the house that you're in. And if my grandmother thought it was just fine to let me stay up past my bedtime playing bartender in the basement, I wasn't going to tell her otherwise. Oh, that basement, y'all. It stood still in time as a 1950s atomic wonderland, complete with a fireplace, linoleum floor, vinyl furniture, and a full-length bar at the far end of the room. That bar was a masterpiece. It had every tool, glass, and bottle a professional bartender could ever want. And it was all centered around a Budweiser Clydesdale model set. It was a look, don't touch kind of thing, but I would spend hours staring at it, I'm making up stories about the horses and fantasizing about the wagon and all the cool places I was sure it had been. In my kid eyes, that model set was the most spectacular thing on earth. On Friday nights, my grandfather would host a bunch of his drinking buddies in that basement rec room. He'd let me stand on a crate behind the bar and pop the tops off beers, and my grandmother would give me ginger ale in a tiki mug. And every so often, she'd give me sips from her White Russian. By 10 p.m., the basement would be flooded with cigar and cigarette smoke so thick that you could taste it in the hors d'oeuvres. That was just the time. It's what people did. Everybody would clear out by about 11 or so, and I'd help my grandmother clean up, while Tony Bennett played on the phonograph in the corner. Tony Bennett pretty much accompanied everything I did with my grandparents. And I loved it. These were always the best nights that I'd had as a kid. And this particular evening was even more special because, well, Christmas was just a few weeks away. There was a small tree glittering in the corner, all decked out with those vertical strands of tinfoil garland and styrofoam ornament spheres way too big for the plastic branches. And me, well, that night I had a promise that we would make a fire and read Holly Hobbie's Christmas book just as soon as the ashtrays were cleared. To help speed things up, I busied myself behind the bar, putting tops in bottles and fixing another White Russian for my grandmother. I never thought of it as anything much. To me it wasn't alcohol, it wasn't something bad. It was just a drink that my grandmother liked, and I liked being able to make it for her. And by then that night, the basement was considerably more quiet. It was just me and Tony Bennett. And out of nowhere, an unexpected thwacking sound coming from the fireplace. The sound was more curious than threatening, and for a minute I thought that Santa might be stopping by for a drink. I had a fuzzy recollection of that having happened in the years past, and it didn't seem so unlikely. So I fixed another White Russian and set both drinks out on the Scandinavian coffee table in the center of the room. I got as comfy as I could with a blanket on that squeaky couch, and I opened the well-worn hardcover book to the first story from my grandmother, who would read it like it was theater, adding voices and commentary, and always suggesting that I could, if I wanted, one day write something better. The thumping and the scratching in the fireplace was an inconsistent presence, one that my grandmother dismissed as the wind. She made a fire and promised me that Santa was safe and secure in the North Pole. But I wasn't so sure. Starting the fire only made the sounds more frequent and aggressive, and it was enough of a commotion to get my grandmother back on her feet and peering into the sooty abyss of the chimney. As a general rule, my grandmother had 3 methods of dealing with things: hit it, clean it, or duct tape it. She seemed a bit stumped as to which route to take with the chimney, so she grabs a shovel and waves it into the smoke chamber, poking around for a loose brick or damper as a Camel cigarette dangled from her lips. In the background, Tony Bennett is singing Rags to Riches. It is a song that I always loved, particularly the sweeping way that he sung the opening line. So I'm humming along, watching as my grandmother jabs around in the chimney with her shovel. She manages to connect with something, but it's not a clump of leaves that drops out of the chimney. It's a fucking bat. It is the mother of all bats. A Southside Chicago bat with a brown rat-like face, full set of wings, and a serious attitude problem. And I am certain that sucker was bigger than my grandmother. It swoops into the room so fast she's nearly knocked off her feet. But I'll tell you, my grandmother may have been wiry, but she was a tough old broad. She quickly recovers and then yells for me to run and hide in the closet. I do as I'm told, and peer through the wooden slats of the door while my grandmother takes a batter stance in the center of the room with the fireplace shovel. Tony is crooning in the background about how your love is all that ever mattered, and my grandmother sizes up the winged creature, which is flapping wildly around the ceiling. The damn thing won't stop moving for a second, but Grandma's quick. She hops on the sofa and then swings the shovel like she is gunning for a home run. And she connects. Not with the bat, but with the Christmas tree, which just topples over and sends sparkly balls rolling in every direction. Grandma chases after the bat as it swoops into the laundry room, and then follows hot on its wingtips as it darts back into the rec room. She is waving the shovel in the air like a warrior, cigarette still clenched between her lips and just grunting as she goes, literally taking out everything that gets in her way. My first grade photo sent sailing across the room. The ugly stuffed fish that my dad caught put out of its misery with a clip to the head. I am cheering from the closet as she ducks and weaves and swings until the bat darts behind the bar in a last-ditch attempt at evasion. Tony Bennett is bringing rags to riches home then, proclaiming that his fate is up to you. And it's then that I see the fireplace shovel raised and brought down in a swift arc once, then again, and again. It's all clang, 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 and I let out a horrified wail. Not because my grandmother was behind the bar beating the ever-loving shit out of a bat with a shovel, but because in the process, she'd managed to shatter the Budweiser Clydesdale display. I tear out of the closet and I storm the bar just as my grandmother has reduced the creature to a pile of bloody bat pulp. I am weeping hysterically and pointing because the beautiful Budweiser Clydesdales are legs up in a pool of bat blood. The overturned wagon is awash in goo. It was the most horrible disaster I had ever witnessed in my 8 years of life. But my grandmother, bless her heart, she was a lady of many resources, and those were much different times. As far as she was concerned, there was little in life that couldn't be solved with a bucket of Clorox, even rabies. So just as she... Just picturing my grandmother with a bucket of Clorox cleaning up a bloody bat. Oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll get my shit together. Hang on. Just as soon as my grandmother bagged up the bat, she got to scrubbing. And by Sunday afternoon, I'll tell y'all, she righted that rec room. The tree was back up, and my grade school photo was back on the wall, and I'll tell you, those Budweiser Clydesdales were as proud as ever, right back behind the bar where they belonged. Sure, they'd lost some of their luster in that bleach bath, but, and one or two were missing a couple of tails, but I'll tell you, to me, they were as beautiful as ever. My grandmother may not have been the most popular lady in my family. She may have had some questionable practices, but I loved that she always treated me like a person, not like a child. I loved that she could take on a bat without fear. Oh, and I loved that she understood the beauty of the Budweiser Clydesdales. And I'm willing to bet you're never going to find that kind of crazy on any DNA report. Cheers, y'all. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I'm having a little bit of a hard time getting into the true spirit of the holiday. And it doesn't help things that I am reading absolutely asinine articles online about how to do things like fight fairly with your partner. At the time, I couldn't help but get all self-righteous and eye-rolly over the whole thing, because my guy and I, we really don't fight. It's just not the way we operate. But every so often, particularly around the holidays, we're put in a situation where the absolute limits of our patience and tolerance are tested, and at least one of us won't rise to the occasion. Oh, who am I kidding? That would be me. I'm always the Grinch. And knowing this, I filed that article away in the depths of my little hamster brain, thinking that perhaps one day it would come in handy. I just didn't expect to have to recall it so soon. You see, My guy and I were recently asked to pet sit. The people who asked us aren't exactly close friends of ours. In fact, they're really more on the outer fringes of our friend circle. So I wasn't thrilled when my guy announced that we would be doing them a favor. You know, in the spirit of the giving season. He is far nicer than I am in many respects, even when it means driving an hour out of town to look in on, now wait for this, a pet bunny rabbit. I really don't see the appeal of keeping a bunny as a pet. And I'm sure plenty of y'all will disagree and tell me how sweet and loving bunnies are. And good for you and your little bunnies. But after spending time with this one, I'm gonna have to disagree. This was not a bunny of the sweet or loving variety. This bunny was a jerk. A mean, nimble little jerk. I'm always kind of amazed at how oblivious some pet owners are of the true nature of their beloved animals. Now, I'm guilty of it too, I know this. I told my guy when we met that my cat was the most awesome creature in the world, and then it took 9 years for her to warm up to him. According to our friends, Bunny Carlos, that's the rabbit's super clever name, well, he's an adorable little critter who lives inside a specially made bunny condo. He would require a clean litter box and fresh hay, veggies, water, and he would need to go for a walk. I look at my guy. A walk? The bunny takes walks? So my guy scans the email that he's been sent outlining the care plan for Bunny Carlos. It was a 3-page email, making it seem more like the instructions on how to assemble a dresser from IKEA than look after a stupid rabbit. My guy nods. It would be too cold to take him outside, so we were supposed to put Bunny Carlos on his very own leash and take him for a couple of laps around the first floor. I'm tempted to tell my guy to just have fun with all that, and I'd return to the comforting warmth I get from the lump of coal I call a heart. Because I know deep in my soul that this is not going to end well for anyone. We get to our friend's house the next morning, and as promised, Bunny Carlos is peering at us from the second level of his 3-story home. It's outfitted with tubs of hay and other crap, as well as what our friends called enrichment, which is really just an obnoxious way to describe chopped up paper towel tubes and balls of sticks. And Bunny Carlos does not look overjoyed to see us. My guy loves all animals, he really does, even the ones that I say make nice coats. So we've agreed that it is up to him to try to coax the rabbit out of his posh little condo and onto his bunny leash. He cautiously goes to the wire door and starts cooing to the suspicious rabbit. Hey there, little buddy. Who wants to go for a walk? I don't really know much about rabbits or their vision or how they react to change, so all I can really comment on is this bunny, who took one look at my guy's face, decided he did not like it, then bared his pointy little bunny teeth, channeled his inner honey badger, and then took a chunk right out of my guy's hand. My guy yanks his hand out of the cage and lets loose a dramatic stream of profanities. Bunny Carlos does not look impressed. Now it's here where my guy and I hit one of those relationship crossroads. And when you're in the moment, you can see it plain as day. There's the bright, well-lit path meant for mature, reasonable people. And then there's that other path. The less bright path that's lined with dead trees and crows. And I'm here to tell you that pulling out your phone and quizzing Siri on whether or not bunnies carry rabies is definitely not the right path to take. My guy stares at me for several very long seconds, and then suggests that if I am so smart, perhaps I should attempt to pull the bunny from his cage myself. This is about as close as my guy and I get to fighting. And it's never so much fighting as it is a sarcastic challenge of ability. Neither of us likes to admit to being wrong or incapable, and we can go for hours like Annie Oakley and Frank Butler, in an elaborate, no you can't, yes I can number. And usually the garage is burning behind us. Or in this case, there's a bunny twitching his nose mockingly. In the heat of this particular moment, I'm reminded of that article I had read about how to fight like a decent human being. So I think, well, what the hell? Let's take some of these tips for a spin. The first tip was to recognize that no one is perfect. Really? I may not be perfect, but I was pretty damn sure I could pull a bunny out of a cage. Magicians have been pulling them out of hats for centuries. How hard could it be? I slip on my leather gloves to shield myself from bunny rabies, and I wrestled that little fluffy monster out of his cage without a problem. And once I had that little guy in my hands, he didn't seem so bad. I scratch his head and he burrows into my hands and we bond. And I look at my guy with a triumphant smile. You see? No problem. Well, I figure that Bunny Carlos and I are simpatico now. So I put him on the ground while I collect his leash. And that, y'all, was a mistake. That fuzzy little rodent saw a chance for escape and he took it. He shot across the floor, took a left turn at Albuquerque, and was gone before my guy or I could blink. I am stunned. The floor is practically smoking that thing took off so fast. What the hell just happened? I asked my guy. And him, helpful to a fault, responds, You lost the bunny. I lost the bunny? I lost the bunny? We wouldn't be dealing with this situation at all if my guy had just politely lied to our friends to get us out of bunny duty like any normal person would have done. So I failed to see how this was my fault. I am fuming. My guy and I have locked eyes. Neither of us wants to budge on fault. So I take a couple of deep breaths, and I let my mind return to that Fair Fight article. And I mentally scan it for something to diffuse the situation. Its big nugget of genius is to find common ground. Common ground? My guy and I were both so annoyed that the only common ground I could see any of us sharing, Bunny included, was a cemetery plot. After that, the article suggests not attempting to read your partner's mind. Oh, please. After 10 years with my guy, I can interpret even his most subtle of movements. And let me tell you, there was nothing subtle about his narrowed eyes or scowl. What would have been more useful would be to read that damn bunny's mind, because that ass monster was gone. That left us in the awkward position of needing to crawl through the underbelly of our friend's home in an unfortunate bunny search party. Under normal circumstances, I am not a snoop. I'm not the kind of person who will peek in someone's medicine cabinet or drawers, although I do understand the appeal. And I am always prepared for people to do just that when they visit us. I'll leave little sample-sized tubes of lube among the packets of hotel soap, and we'll fill empty Vicodin prescription bottles to the brim with Pez just to see if anyone notices. But it is entirely something else to be rooting around in the dark recesses of a home, poking around in the very places that collect all of our dark secrets. I will say that considering the many piles of poo pellets I found under chairs, I was kind of relieved that this obviously wasn't Bunny Carlos's first great escape. My guy and I are crawling on our hands and knees, trying our best to make bunny noises, and calling out the damn bunny's name as if it's actually going to perk up and say, Yes, you called? I'm struck then by what is finally a decent bit of advice from that Fair Fight article. Now, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it essentially recommended just shutting the hell up and listening. Which I say to my guy. So we pause. And aside from the buzzing of our mutual annoyance, there is only one sound in the room. Chewing. It's coming from behind the Christmas tree. We quietly inch closer and peer through the branches of the Christmas tree. And what do you know? It's a Christmas miracle. There's Bunny Carlos, planted smack in the middle of a manger, and merrily chewing his way through a cardboard nativity scene. He didn't seem especially inclined to give up the baby Jesus, and considering the chunk he took out of my guy's hand earlier, we weren't inclined to force the issue. Instead, we collected them both and returned Bunny Carlos to his condo. The nativity scene was destroyed. And I couldn't help but think that that crafty little bunny rabbit had planned the whole attack from the beginning. And you gotta wonder who's the bigger Grinch here. We knew we couldn't just leave that mess for our friends to find, but we also knew that there was absolutely no reasonable way to explain what had happened without at least the buffer of a few cocktails. So I grabbed a pen and wrote out a note for our friends that I signed the bunny's name to. It read, "Dear owners, I'm sorry I ate your baby Jesus." I show it to my guy, who says, I couldn't have written it any better myself. And I know that once again, he and I are on even ground. And now I am raising up my glass and toasting to Bunny Carlos, who, by the way, is doing just fine. As for his owners, well, let's just say they won't be asking us to pet sit anytime soon. And I am just fine with that. Cheers, y'all.
Go to theunwritablrant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter at Morning Neurosis.
Girl, you was pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Clydesdales. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton. Hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.